Good afternoon, and welcome to part 2 of ANA's evaluation webinar series entitled Why the Wise Man Built His Project on Solid Metrics. A copy of this PowerPoint can be provided by emailing a request to anaeastern@namsinc.org. Be sure to note that you would like the evaluation webinar. My name is Dawn David, Outreach and Technology Specialist for the Eastern Region TTA Center and longtime reviewer for ANA. I am Mohawk from Akwesasne. This webinar is being presented by the Eastern Region Training and Technical Assistance Center, a resource of the Administration for Native Americans. ANA is a program located within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Administration for Children and Families. ANA serves all Native Americans, including federally recognized tribes, American Indian and Alaska Native organizations, Native Hawaiian organizations, and Native populations throughout the Pacific Basin. ANA promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations in 3 program areas: Social and Economic Development Strategy, or SEDS, Native Languages, and Environmental Regulatory Enhancement. ANA holds weekly webinars on a variety of topics, including ACF initiatives, program success stories, and application development. Webinars are held every Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find a full listing of webinars by going to the website address on the screen. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is the second part in a 4-part series in the Application Evaluation series. Part 1 was presented in May, hosted by the Pacific Region TTA Center, entitled Jumpstart Your Organization Through the Engine of Constant Improvement. If you wish to view this webinar, a recording is available at www.anapacificbasin.org. This webinar, Part 2 of the series, again is entitled Why the Wise Man Built His Project on Solid Matrix. Part 3, Mastering the 4 Stages of the Evaluation Cycle, will be hosted by the Western Region TTA Center on July 11th. You can get more information or register for this webinar at www.anawestern.org. Part 4 is How to Use Evaluation Results to Build Community Support and Receive Additional Funding, which is hosted by the Alaska Region TTA Center on July 25th. You can find registration information on their website, www.anaalaska.org. Topics to be covered by this webinar include a recap of the first evaluation webinar, tailoring evaluation to your project, and ensuring the evaluation is appropriate and corresponds to your outcomes. Now let's recap the first webinar. The first webinar provided information on what evaluation is and what evaluation is not. It presented the benefits to organizations and projects from evaluating operations, and provided a framework for institutionalizing evaluation into overall operations. Again, if you wish to view the first webinar, it is available on the Pacific Region's website. What is project evaluation? Let's get started. Using the definition from the first webinar, we are defining evaluation as a systematic process of collecting and analyzing data in order to determine whether and to what degree objectives have been or are being achieved, or to make a decision. Project staff frequently informally assess their project's effectiveness. Are participants benefiting from the project? Do we have sufficient numbers of participants? Are our recruitment efforts working? Are participants satisfied with the trainings we're providing? Do project staff have the necessary skills? These are all questions that project managers and staff ask and answer on a routine basis. Evaluation addresses these same types of questions, but uses a systematic approach for gathering information on projects to ensure that the answers are supported with evidence. Evaluation is also the language of funders, so you need to understand that language in order to communicate the story of your project. There are different types of evaluation. We will look at and discuss process evaluation and outcome evaluation. Process evaluation examines the extent to which a project is operating as intended by assessing ongoing program operations and whether the target population is being served. It involves collecting data that describes project operations in detail, including the types and levels of services provided, staffing, socio-demographic characteristics of participants, the community which services are provided, and the linkages with collaborating agencies. A process evaluation helps the project staff identify any potential changes necessary to improve project implementation. It is also called formative or implementation evaluation. Okay. Outcome evaluation is designed to assess the extent to which a project affects participants according to specific variables or data elements. These results are expected to be caused by project activities and tested by comparison of results across sample groups in the target population, also known as impact evaluation. Most project directors focus on process evaluation, but in order for a good outcome evaluation to occur, like the ones A&E impact evaluators conduct, they will need to have good metrics with solid data. By identifying both the high points and the low points of a project, evaluation draws conclusions that can inform future decision making and assist to design future projects. Some other reasons to evaluate your project are to be accountable to those who are funding the project. Most agencies are requiring quantitative data for funded projects. Also, to determine whether you have met your project objectives. In addition, to reflect on whether you need to improve the way things are being done, and to provide information for planning future projects, and to create a project that not only addresses the review criterion, but also is more likely to be a successful project. It should also be noted that A&E reports results from funded projects to Congress, which could affect funding in the future. How do you design a project that can be evaluated? When designing your project, it is important to choose evaluations that will demonstrate you've met your objectives and goal. The way you can achieve this is by creating SMART objectives. By demonstrating that you've improved or reduced the identified problem, and by including activities in your objective work plan for evaluation at regular intervals. Your objectives explain how you will accomplish the goal. You need to provide SMART objectives, which are specific, which action will be done to accomplish the objective. Will you train, create, teach, increase? Measurable. The objective needs to include measurable outcomes that will make measurable differences in the community. Achievable. The objective needs to be realistic and something you can accomplish within the project period using the resources you've identified. Relevant and results-oriented. The objective should address your project goal and your community's long-term goals. It also needs to focus on the outcomes of the project. And time-bound. What time frame are you looking at to accomplish this objective? Stating objectives in measurable terms simply means that you describe what you plan to do in your program and how you expect the participants to change in a way that will allow you to measure these objectives. From this perspective, measurement can involve anything from counting the number of services to using a standardized test that will result in a quantifiable score. How will you show that the expected changes occurred? To answer this question, you will have to identify the evidence needed to demonstrate that your participants or conditions have changed. For an A&A grant, applicants should demonstrate this in the outcomes expected criterion, where they are expected to provide results, benefits, and one or more impact indicators. Outcomes expected describes the changes in participants or a condition that you think will follow after the implementation of your project. A&A separates the outcomes into three categories. First one is results. What is produced because of the project or the outputs? Second is the benefits. What is achieved or the positive changes from achieving the project results? Third, impact. Lasting or long-term effects of the project. So you identify results, benefits, and impacts for your project, but how do you prove that you achieved them? The answer is through measurements. The measurements are the criteria for evaluating the results and benefits in the impact indicator. So let's look at how we can come up with these outcomes. It may be helpful for your application team to use a table and brainstorm as many results as you can think of and how to evaluate each of them. For each result, you may have a number of different ways to evaluate it. Using the example on the screen, this project will produce 10 training sessions. How can this be evaluated? By having participants sign in for each session. We can also use a table to outline the benefits and its evaluation method. List benefits that correspond to the results you've selected, and eventually you can incorporate this into your objective work plan. Again, using the example on the screen, what positive change will be achieved by this example? 60 tribal members will be certified and employed. How can this be evaluated? We can track the number of certificates of completion that were awarded and follow employment records to track participants that found employment. Let's look at how we can tie results and benefits to their corresponding criteria for evaluation. Let's use this process on a language example. From this example, for results, we can see that this organization will establish an after-school language program for tribal youth. How can this be evaluated? By tracking the number of participants that sign in for language classes. For benefits, the organization's positive achievement is tribal youth developing native language proficiency. How can this be evaluated? By conducting pre- and post-fluency tests. Let's try this with a SEDS example. For results, we see that this organization will develop financial management training materials. How can this be evaluated? By tracking the number of training manuals produced. For benefits, this organization's positive achievement is an increase in financial management skills. How can this be evaluated? By conducting pre- and post tests on financial literacy. What about impact indicators? ANA asks applicants to identify at least one impact indicator that they will track and work towards achieving during and after the project. They also ask for 3 data points that will be used to measure a significant change in the condition. The 3 data points are pre-grant status, which is baseline information often matches the information used in the problem statement, the end of grant target number, what you expect to change by the implementation of your project, and the 3-year target number, which will measure the continued impact in your community. Here are some suggestions when selecting an impact indicator. Be sure to align project goal with the impact indicator. Identify an impact indicator that adequately measures the changes in the condition of the problem statement. Ensure that the impact indicator is relevant and realistic. In general, it's best to avoid abstract outcomes that are difficult to measure, such as increased self-esteem or increased quality of life. Ask yourself, how will I measure increased self-esteem or increased quality of life? If you have difficulty coming up with a measurement tool, you might want to reconsider your impact indicator. Again, a chart may be helpful to identify impact indicators and their 3 data points. Take some time developing an impact indicator that addresses the problem statement of your application and tracks the significant change your project will make in your community. Note the 2 examples on the screen, a SEDS and a language proposal. The SEDS example chooses a decrease in the unemployment rate as their impact indicator. Using their problem statement as a baseline, the applicant identified a 60% unemployment rate in their community. They propose the implementation of their project will decrease the unemployment rate to 40% and anticipate the continued impact of their project will further decrease the unemployment rate to 30% 3 years after the project period. For language projects designed to teach a native language, the impact indicator will be increased fluency, as in the example on the screen. Note that these examples provide numeric measures. One of the services the regional TA providers offer is the review of A&E applications before they're submitted. Applicants can request technical assistance and will review their applications and provide them comments for ways to improve their application. We just got done with reviewing applications for SEDS, language, and environmental competition, which ended on June 6th. And we noticed a number of applicants that had difficulties identifying results, benefits, and impact indicators. Either they provided a paragraph or two, or they didn't come up with ways to effectively evaluate the project's accomplishments. Make sure you spend some time developing a solid evaluation plan that effectively assesses your project. As we said earlier, you want to be able to provide evidence to funders to prove that your project was successful. You also want to be able to show that same proof to your community and leadership. Now let's look at building evaluation into your project design. Evaluation can take place at any time in a project, but it is most effective when it's built in as a fundamental part of your project. Conduct evaluation at agreed upon milestones. For example, on a quarterly basis for inclusion on your objective progress report. Make sure you're not just collecting data, but you're analyzing it as you implement your project. Let's say you're conducting trainings during your project. You've collected sign-in sheets, participant test scores, and participant evaluations, and you've put them in a file folder. You plan on analyzing them when the project ends. If you do that, you won't see that the participants are getting scores in the 50s and 60s. You won't see that they gave the trainer low scores. Had you analyzed the data as you progressed, you could have taken action to either retool your training curriculum or get a new trainer to improve your project's overall impact. When designing your evaluation plan, you will also need to determine who will conduct the evaluation. There are pros and cons for both internal and external evaluators. With internal evaluators, evaluations can be done on the fly, they're less expensive, and the staff is more knowledgeable of the project. External evaluators are more costly and require more time to select, negotiate contracts, monitor, determine schedules, etc. They may also create staff anxiety about being evaluated. And external evaluators are often unfamiliar with organization policies and certain constraints affecting the project. If designed properly, external evaluators will not be necessary for your project unless your project is very complex. In general, you should be able to conduct your evaluation in-house. It is also important to note that this year's SEEDS FOA clearly states that applicants must not include costs for external evaluations in their budgets. A&A impact evaluations. A&A visits about 1/3 of its current grantees each year for impact evaluations. The purpose of the visit is to collect qualitative and quantitative information and can occur during the 3 months prior to or after a project's end date, usually lasting a full work day. Impact visits provide A&A the opportunity to meet with project staff and beneficiaries in order to collect data on the project's outcomes. The purpose of the impact visit is threefold. 1. To assess the impact of A&A funding on Native American communities in accordance with the Native American Programs Act of 1974 and the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993. 2. To increase knowledge about the successes and challenges of A&A grantees, improving A&A service delivery. And 3. To increase transparency and collaboration by sharing the unique stories of A&A grantees with Native communities and the public. To recap, let's answer the question posed by the title of this webinar. Why did the wise man build his project on solid metrics? He built it on solid metrics because it made his project more successful. By well-chosen and documented metrics, he knew what the community wanted. He was able to identify when something wasn't working. He could tell when something was working better than expected. He was able to prove to his leadership and his community. You could provide evidence to funders that the project was going to have an impact on the community. Another important thing to note when choosing evaluation plans is the context of your project. When you build a house, you need to know something about your lot. If there's a hill on your lot, you must consider the slope of the hill when you design your house. Similarly, keep in mind the context of your project when designing the evaluation. There are as many tools to evaluate your projects as there are individual projects. Another thing to keep in mind is your project measurable? Make sure that you identify measurable results, benefits, and impact indicators. And lastly, be sure to build in evaluation activities throughout the project. Include collection of data as well as compilation and its analysis. Remember, you can always utilize A&E's resources available on their website and your regional training and technical assistance providers. A&E Regional Technical Assistants are available to help you. Thank you for joining us today. Please take advantage of the entire webinar series. Part 3 will be on July 11th and Part 4 will be on July 25th. This concludes our webinar. Have a great afternoon.